The woman at the information booth had been dead for 6 hours before I realized she was still talking to me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, from the moment I walked through those glass doors and felt something shift in the air, something cold and wrong that I couldn't name yet. I want you to understand exactly how it happened. Because if it happens to you, I need you to know. Do not look at it directly. Do not let it know that you know. And whatever you do, do not miss the last bus. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that on a Tuesday night in November, I was standing inside the Greenvale Intercity bus terminal at 11:47 p.m., soaking wet from the kind of rain that comes down sideways, exhausted down to the marrow, and carrying a broken umbrella that had given up its one job somewhere around 5th and Madison. I'd been working a double shift at the distribution center, 14 hours on my feet, scanning boxes, loading pallets, watching the clock like it owed me money. The Route 9 bus back to Millfield ran twice a day, once at 6 a.m. and once at midnight. I'd missed the 6 a.m. by 20 minutes on the way in. Now I was cutting it close on the midnight, which was the last run of the night. Last run of the week, actually. After this, nothing until Thursday morning. I couldn't afford a cab. I couldn't afford to be stranded. So I pushed through those glass doors into the terminal and I told myself the chill I felt was just from the rain. The Greenvale terminal is one of those places that was clearly grand about 40 years ago and has been quietly surrendering to time ever since. High ceilings with ornate plasterwork that nobody bothers to clean anymore. Marble floors gone cloudy with age. A row of orange plastic bucket seats bolted to the wall in clusters of 4, the kind that make your lower back ache after 3 minutes. A newsstand shuttered behind a corrugated metal shutter. Vending machines humming in the corner, one of them dark, its screen dead. At that hour, the terminal held maybe 6 people. A young guy in a hoodie, asleep across 3 seats with his backpack over his face. An older woman with 2 rolling suitcases, reading something on her phone, her mouth moving slightly like she was practicing what she'd say to someone. A family, a man, a woman, a small girl in pigtails, clustered near gate 4, the child asleep against her mother's shoulder. And then, at the far end of the terminal, at the very last bench against the back wall beneath a bank of fluorescent lights, a figure. I noticed it the way you notice something in your peripheral vision. Not directly. Just a shape at the edge of my awareness. Someone sitting very, very still. I didn't look. Not yet. I was too focused on getting to the ticket window before it closed. The woman at the information booth was somewhere in her 60s, with steel gray hair pinned back and reading glasses on a beaded chain. She was sitting behind a plexiglass partition under a sign that read information, ticketing, and she was looking straight ahead at nothing in particular. "Excuse me," I said, pressing my transit pass against the little slot in the partition. "I need to check. Is the midnight Route 9 to Millfield still running? The board outside says on time, but I wanted to confirm." She didn't respond. "Ma'am?" Nothing. Her eyes were open. She was breathing. I could see the slight rise and fall of her chest. But she was looking through me, through the partition, through the wall behind me, at something located somewhere past the physical world. I knocked on the plexiglass. Her head turned, slowly, like something mechanical completing a rotation. "Route 9, she said. Her voice was perfectly flat, perfectly even. No warmth, no irritation. Just information being delivered. Midnight departure. Gate 7. On time. "Thank you," I said. She turned back to face forward. Just like that. No nod. No goodbye. Eyes forward again, staring at nothing. I told myself she was just tired. Lord knows I was tired. I found a seat in the middle of the terminal, about halfway between the entrance and that far bench, and I sat down and I checked my phone, 43 minutes until midnight, and I decided to close my eyes for just a moment. The sound woke me. Not a loud sound. A soft one. A kind of shuffling, papery sound like something being dragged slowly across the marble floor. I opened my eyes and looked around the terminal. The young guy in the hoodie was still asleep. The woman with the suitcases was still reading, mouth still moving. The family at gate 4, still there, the child still sleeping, the parents now both looking at their phones. I checked the time. 11:58. 2 minutes. And then I looked at the far bench. The figure was still there. And something about it caught my eye in a way I couldn't quite articulate, the way you catch a wrong note in a song. Not obviously wrong, just slightly, uncomfortably off. The figure was dressed in a dark coat, long, almost floor length, with a hat pulled low. Sitting completely upright. Hands placed on knees. Head facing forward. Completely still. I mean completely still. No fidgeting. No phone. No shifting of weight. Just seated, as if posing for a painting that no one had ever come to paint. I watched for a moment, waiting for movement. None came. Some people just sit still, I thought. You're overtired. Stop it. I looked away. The announcement speaker crackled to life above me, a sound so sudden and loud in the quiet terminal that I physically flinched, and the young guy in the hoodie stirred but didn't wake. Attention passengers. Attention passengers. The 11:59 departure to static. Long, grinding static, the kind that seems to carry something inside it, a texture like something breathing. Then the voice again, warped now, slowed down slightly as if the recording had gotten wet. The 11:59 departure to, and then silence. I looked up at the speaker mounted on the pillar above me. The red indicator light was off. The speaker wasn't supposed to be on at all. I looked toward the information booth. The woman behind the plexiglass had not reacted. She was still staring forward. Her reading glasses had slipped slightly down her nose. I looked at the overhead display board. Route 9, Gate 7, 12 a.m. on time. 40 seconds. I stood up and gathered my bag and started walking toward Gate 7. I don't know why I looked back. I just did. Some instinct, some animal thing in the base of my brain that said look behind you. The far bench was closer now. I stopped walking. That's not possible. The bench, the last bench at the far end of the terminal, the one pressed against the back wall, was maybe 30 feet closer to me than it had been when I sat down. Or no, that couldn't be right, benches don't move. Maybe I had remembered the layout wrong. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe. The figure on the bench was looking at me. Not at the middle distance. Not at nothing. At me. The hat was still pulled low, but I could see the lower half of a face beneath the brim. A jaw. A mouth. It was not smiling. It was not frowning. It was expressionless in the way that no human face is ever expressionless. Because even in total rest, even in sleep, the human face carries some residue of feeling, some ghost of the last emotion it held. This face had none. It was as blank as a wall. And it did not blink. I stood frozen in the middle of the terminal for what felt like a long time, watching it watch me. Waiting for it to blink. It did not blink. Go to the gate, I told myself. Just go to the gate. I turned and walked. Not ran, I was very deliberate about not running, toward Gate 7. I pushed through the door to the gate corridor and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The corridor was fluorescent bright and narrow, 4 gates in a row, the doors to the loading bays stenciled with numbers. Gate 7 was at the end. Through the gate door's small rectangular window, I could see the loading bay. Empty. No bus yet. I checked my phone. Midnight exactly. I pressed my face against the glass and looked left and right. The bay was empty in both directions. I told myself the bus was just slightly late. It happened. Routes ran late all the time. I would stand here at the gate and the bus would come and I would get on it and go home and sleep for approximately 1,000 years. The fluorescent light above Gate 6 flickered. I looked up at it. It steadied. Then it flickered again twice rapidly like a blink and went out entirely. In the dimness, I looked through the window of Gate SAXS door. The loading bay on the other side was dark. Standing in that darkness, about 10 feet back from the door, was the figure in the long coat. I could see it clearly even in the dark. I don't know how. I just could. The way you can see the shape of something that is darker than the dark around it. It was facing the door. Facing me. It had not blinked once. I took a step back. The light above Gate 6 came back on. The loading bay was empty. The bus arrived at 12:04. I heard it before I saw it. The hiss of air brakes, the groan of a large vehicle maneuvering in a tight space. I was through the door and down the steps and on that bus before the driver had finished opening the door, and I found a seat midway back and sat down and pressed my forehead against the cold glass and watched the terminal building recede as we pulled out of the bay. As we cleared the building and turned onto the access road, the terminal's exterior came into view, the big glass facade lit from inside, warm amber light spilling through the windows. I was looking for a reason to feel normal again. I was looking at the ordinary geometry of a building I was leaving behind. Then I saw the last bench. It was visible through the glass facade from the outside. And sitting on it, in the same position, upright, hands on knees, hat pulled low, was the figure in the long coat. So, watching the bus pull away. I don't know what made me reach for my phone and open the photo I'd taken of the terminal's information board when I first arrived. Just a habit I have, photographing schedules so I remember them. I don't know why I zoomed in on the background of the photo. But there it was. In a photo taken at 11:48 p.m. before I had sat down, before I had gone to the ticket window, the figure in the long coat, sitting on the far bench, already perfectly still, already watching the entrance doors. Already waiting. I showed the photo to the bus driver at our first stop. He looked at it for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, We had a driver years back tell us there was always someone waiting at that terminal when he did the last run. Always the same bench. Always the same coat. He said it had been there every night for as long as he could remember. He handed the phone back. Company pulled him off the route. Said he was imagining things. What happened to him? I asked. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror. His expression was careful and measured, the way a person's face gets when they're deciding how much truth to release. He went back one night, he said, to prove to himself it wasn't real. The bus doors wheezed shut. We pulled back onto the highway. They found his coat, the driver said quietly, on the last bench, just sitting there, neatly folded. And him? The driver didn't answer. He just watched the road unspool ahead of us into the dark. I looked down at my phone, at the photo, at the figure already waiting long before I arrived, and I thought about the woman at the information booth, the flat voice, the eyes that focused on nothing, the way she had turned her head, slow and mechanical like something completing a rotation. I thought about how she hadn't looked tired. She had looked like something wearing the idea of tiredness. I thought about how, when I left through the gate corridor, I had not looked back at the information booth. I thought about how I did not know with any certainty whether the woman behind that plexiglass had been breathing, or whether I had simply assumed she was breathing, the way you assume the things that look like people are people, because the alternative is too large and too dark to hold in your mind while you are standing in a bus terminal at midnight, alone 43 minutes from the last bus home. The highway lights slid past, one after another, orange and even, like the countdown of something I couldn't name. I still haven't gone back. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm coming home from a long shift and the city is quiet and empty in that particular way, the way it gets when most of the world is asleep and you're one of the few people still moving through it, I think about that terminal. I think about the bench at the far end. And I wonder how long it's been there. And I wonder what it's waiting for. And I wonder if, somewhere across this country right now, there is a terminal just like it. A last bench. A figure in a long coat. And someone, tired, wet, just trying to get home, who hasn't looked up yet. Don't look up. The bus that came for me that night wasn't on any schedule. And when the doors hissed open, the driver looked straight at me, straight through me, and said my name. My name is Caleb Marsh, and I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened. I am not the kind of person who believes in ghost stories. I'm a line cook. I work double shifts at a diner called Patty's off Route 9 in Harlow, Indiana. Population 4,000, give or take whoever moved away that week. I believe in sore feet and grease burns and the smell of fryer oil that never quite leaves your hair no matter how many times you wash it. I believe in overtime pay and the last 20 minutes of a shift when the clock on the wall seems to physically slow down out of spite. I do not believe in things that go bump in the night. Or I didn't. Before the night of October 14th. It was a Wednesday. Not that it matters, except that Wednesdays are always my latest nights. I close the kitchen, scrub the flat top, count the till, and by the time I step out into the cold I've usually missed the 10:40 bus, which means I'm stuck waiting for the 11:55. The Harlow Regional Transit Authority runs exactly 2 buses after 10 o'clock on weekdays. The 10:40 and the 11:55. That's it. You missed the second one, you're walking 4 miles home in the dark. So I was sitting in the Harlow bus terminal at 11:18 p.m., which gave me 37 minutes to kill. I want you to picture this place because the place matters. The Harlow terminal is not what you'd call impressive. It's a squat concrete building, maybe 60 feet wide, with fluorescent lights that have been threatening to die for the better part of a decade. There are 12 plastic chairs bolted to the floor in 2 rows of 6, the kind of orange that was probably cheerful in 1987 and is now the color of old apologies. There's a vending machine that sells chips and candy and a bottled water that costs $2.50, which feels like a personal insult. There's a single bathroom around the corner with a lock that doesn't quite catch. And there's the board. The departures board. An old flip-style board, the kind with the plastic tiles that rotate and click into place. Most terminals have switched to digital screens by now, but Harlow hasn't gotten around to it. The board shows route number, destination, departure time, and platform. On a busy afternoon, it might show 8 or 10 routes. At 11:18 on a Wednesday night, it showed exactly 1. Route 14, Millfield, 11:55 p.m., Platform 2. That was my bus. Platform 2, 40-pound overnight bag at my feet, phone at 11% battery, and not another soul in the terminal. I remember thinking how strange it was to be completely alone in a public space. There's always someone in a bus terminal, a sleepy college kid, an old woman with too many bags, a man in a windbreaker reading yesterday's newspaper. But that night it was just me. Me and the hum of the fluorescence and the slow, patient ticking of the clock above the door. I put in my earbuds. I pulled up a podcast. I closed my eyes. And that's when the board made a sound I'd never heard it make before. It wasn't the normal clicking sound the tiles make when a route is updating. It was more like static. A dry, grinding rattle like something caught in the mechanism. I pulled out one earbud and looked up. The board was cycling. All of it. Every tile spinning at once the way they do when the system resets. Except this didn't look like a reset. The tiles weren't settling into new information. They were spinning and spinning, the plastic clacking in an arrhythmic pattern that set my teeth on edge, like listening to someone try to play a song they only half remembered. I watched it for maybe 20 seconds before it stopped. Route 14 was gone. The board now read, Route 14, Millfield, 11:55 p.m., Platform 2. Route 7, Cedarview, 11:30 p.m., Platform 1. Route 22, Dunmore, 12:10 a.m., Platform 3. I stared at that for a long moment. Route 7 to Cedarview. Route 22 to Dunmore. I'd ridden Route 14 out of Harlow Terminal twice a week for 3 years. I had never once seen Route 7 or Route 22 on that board. Not at any hour on any day. I stood up and walked to the customer service window, a narrow rectangle of plexiglass in the far wall, but the window was dark. No one on the other side. There was a laminated sheet of paper taped to the inside of the glass that said service hours, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. It was 11:21. I went back to my seat and Googled Harlow, Indiana bus route 7 Cedarview. No results. I tried Harlow Transit Route 22 Dunmore. No results. I tried just Cedarview, Indiana, and Dunmore, Indiana. No results. No results. No results. My phone was at 9%. I told myself the board must have glitched, pulled in data from some other terminal, some other town. Old hardware does weird things. I'd seen the Route 14 tiles get stuck before, showing a departure time from 3 days ago like a ghost haunting its own schedule. This was probably just that. A glitch. I put my earbud back in. At 11:26, I heard the board cycle again. When I looked up, Route 7 and 22 were gone. In their place, Route 14, Millfield, 11:55 p.m., Platform 2. Route 31, Harrow's Crossing, 11:40 p.m., Platform 4. Route 9, Belmare, 11:45 p.m., Platform 1. Harrow's Crossing, Belmare. I did not Google these. Something about seeing those names, the particular feel of them like words you'd find at the bottom of an old box, made me not want to. I sat very still and looked at the board and tried to remember the last time I'd seen another person in this terminal at this hour. I couldn't. The clock read 11:28. 27 minutes until my bus. I noticed the silence at 11:31. Not the ordinary late-night quiet of an empty room. I was used to that. This was something else. Something with texture to it, like the silence had thickened. I pulled out both earbuds and sat very still and listened, and what I heard was nothing. Not the hum of the fluorescence. Not the rattle of the vending machine compressor. Not the faint, distant sound of a car on Route 9 that you could always hear if you paid attention. Not the tick of the clock. I looked at the clock. It had stopped at 11:29. I looked at my phone. The time on my phone said 11:31. 2 minutes had passed and the clock on the wall hadn't moved. The second hand was frozen at the 43-second mark like it had been pinned there. The lights were still on. The board was still lit. My phone still had a signal. 7%, but a signal. Everything was technically functioning. But the room felt wrong in a way I couldn't have explained to you, the way a familiar face looks wrong in certain light and you can't say exactly why, you just know something has shifted. I stood up. I picked up my bag. I walked to the front door of the terminal, the glass door facing the parking lot, and I pushed it open and stepped outside. The parking lot was empty. Not just of people, of sound. The night air hit my face and I realized I couldn't hear anything. No wind. No insects. No highway noise. Harlow, Indiana at 11:31 on a Wednesday night is not a loud place, but it is never completely silent. There are always crickets in October. There is always some far-off rumble of a truck on the interstate. There was nothing. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, 1 foot in the terminal and 1 foot in the parking lot, like I was afraid to commit to either side. The sky above was perfectly black, not dark blue the way a clear sky usually looks, but black, without stars, without the faint orange glow of light pollution from the direction of town. Just black like something had been held over the sky. I went back inside. The board now showed 6 routes. I didn't read the names. I sat down in my chair and I stared at the floor between my feet and I told myself, very calmly and deliberately, you are tired. You worked a 12-hour shift. You are experiencing the mild perceptual distortions that come with exhaustion and low blood sugar. Everything is fine. Your bus comes at 11:55 and you will be home by 12:30 and none of this will seem strange in the morning. At 11:37, the board cycled one last time. When the tiles stopped, every single route had been replaced by the same destination, repeated 6 times. Route, platform, blank. Every line, blank. Except for Route 14, which still read Millfield, 11:55, Platform 2. Just mine. Just the one I needed. I told myself that was a comfort. At 11:49 I heard it. Not the rumble of a bus engine. I know what that sounds like, the low diesel growl that you feel in your sternum before you hear it with your ears. This was more like a pressure. A change in the air inside the terminal, the way a room feels when someone opens a window somewhere in the house and the pressure shifts. Then, gradually, an engine sound building from nothing, as if the bus had materialized from silence rather than driven in from the road. I went to the window. There was a bus at Platform 2. It was a standard transit coach, white with the blue stripe that all the Harlow regional buses have, the route number in the LED display above the windshield. But the LED display wasn't showing a number. It was showing one word. Connecting. I've never seen a Harlow bus display that word. I've never seen any bus display that word. It sat there with its engine running and its doors closed and I stood at the window and thought, this is not right. This is not right and I should not get on this bus. Then the doors opened. And the driver leaned forward in his seat and looked directly at me through the terminal window. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, wearing the gray uniform that Harlow Regional Transit drivers wear. He had a face that was hard to focus on, not because it was disfigured or strange, but because every time I tried to hold on to the details, they slipped away, like trying to remember a face from a dream. I could tell you he had a face. I could not tell you what it looked like. He raised one hand. He beckoned. I told myself, this is the 11:55. It's 6 minutes early. That happens. And connecting just means it's a connecting service. It's going to Millfield, but it makes stops I don't know about. That's all. That's a perfectly normal explanation. I picked up my bag. I went outside. I walked to Platform 2. The driver was watching me approach. When I reached the door, I looked up at him and I said, this is Route 14? To Millfield. He said, that's right, Caleb. I had not told him my name. My name is not printed on my bag or my jacket or anything I was carrying. I'm not a local celebrity. I am a line cook who rides the bus. He knew my name. I stood there with my foot on the first step and I said, how do you know my name? And he smiled. I know he smiled because I could feel it even though I still could not hold his face in my mind. And he said, we know everyone on this route, son. Go ahead and take a seat. We're right on time. Right on time. It was 11:49. I got on the bus. There were 11 other people on the bus. I know it was 11 because I counted. Twice. Because counting felt like something to do, something concrete and sane. They were seated singly, no 2 people sharing a double seat. They were distributed throughout the bus with the kind of even spacing you'd expect if someone had arranged them deliberately. 1 person every 2 or 3 rows all the way to the back. None of them were moving. Now, I know what you're thinking. People on late-night buses are tired. They sleep. They stare out the window. They don't necessarily look like they're bursting with life at midnight on a Wednesday. I know all that. I've been the tired person on the late-night bus. I know what that looks like. This was different. Nobody was sleeping exactly. Their eyes were open. At least, the eyes I could see. Most of them were facing forward toward the front of the bus and I was boarding from the front, which meant I was walking past faces rather than the backs of heads. And their eyes were open. But there was no quality to the gaze. No sense that the eyes were registering anything. They looked the way a television screen looks when it's on, but nobody has programmed it to show anything, lit but empty. I sat down in the 3rd row window seat, left side of the bus. The nearest passenger was a woman 4 rows back, maybe 50 years old, in a tan overcoat, with a canvas tote bag in her lap. She was looking straight ahead. As I settled into my seat, I turned to look at her, and for a moment her eyes tracked toward me, and I felt a dizzying wave of relief. She's looking at me, she's aware, she's a normal person on a normal bus. And then I realized her gaze wasn't moving to meet mine. It was just pointing in my direction. Like a flashlight. Like something that produces light without needing to see. The doors closed. The bus began to move. I know Route 14 to Millfield. I have ridden it 150 times, maybe more. I know every stop, every turn, every stretch of road. I know the liquor store on the corner of Harlow Avenue and 5th Street, the one with the blue neon open sign that's been on for so long it's burned into the window. I know the long straight stretch of empty highway past the grain elevator where the bus picks up speed and holds it for a beautiful 3 minutes before the Carver Township exit. I know the water tower outside Millfield that you can see from the highway, with Millfield painted on it in letters so old they've faded to gray. Within 2 minutes of leaving the terminal, I knew we were not on Route 14. The road outside my window was wrong. It was a 2-lane road, that was right, but the shoulders were different, too wide, and the tree line was too close, right up against the road with no houses or field breaks, just solid wall of dark trees pressing in from both sides. Route 14 runs through open farmland for the first 6 miles. There are no stretches like this on Route 14, not anywhere. I looked for landmarks. There were none. No houses. No mailboxes. No utility poles. No road signs. Just the road and the trees and the faint edge of the bus's headlights pushing into a darkness that felt less like night and more like an absence of something. I stood up. I walked to the front of the bus. The driver was sitting with both hands on the wheel, eyes forward. I stood in the stairwell behind him and I said, "Excuse me, this doesn't look like the Route 14 corridor. Where are we?" He said without turning his head, "We're en route." "What does that mean? What road is this?" "Please take your seat, Caleb. I want to know where." "Take your seat." There was something in his voice when he said that the second time. Not loud. Not threatening exactly. Just final. The kind of final that made arguing feel not just pointless but somehow dangerous. The way you don't argue with a sound you hear in the dark, you just go still. I went back to my seat. I tried to call someone. My phone showed a signal, but every call I placed rang once and cut to a fast, busy signal. Not voicemail, not ringing out, just that mechanical stutter of a line that can't connect. I tried my brother. My coworker Dana. 911. The Harlow Police non-emergency line. 3 separate times 911. Fast, busy. Every time. The bus kept moving. The trees kept pressing in. The road kept unspoiling ahead of us with no curves, no turns, no intersections. Just straight, like a road that had been drawn with a ruler by someone who didn't believe in geography. It was somewhere around the 40-minute mark, 40 minutes into a trip that should have been 22, that I started really looking at the other passengers. Not glancing, looking. The woman in the tan coat 4 rows back, she hadn't moved. Not at all. Her hands were in her lap exactly the way they'd been when I boarded. Her head was at the same angle. The canvas tote bag hadn't shifted. In 40 minutes on a moving bus, she had not adjusted, not blinked, not turned to look out the window. Nothing. I told myself, some people can really sleep. I looked at the man across the aisle from her, younger, maybe 30, in a green army surplus jacket. Same thing. Perfectly, absolutely still. I looked toward the back of the bus. 6 rows back, a teenage girl with headphone cords hanging from her ears. The headphone cords were hanging straight down. Perfectly vertical, despite the motion of the bus. Motion moves things. It moves headphone cords and jacket collars and loose hair and the fold of a newspaper. Motion leaves evidence. You can see it, the small physics of a moving vehicle working on everything inside it. Nothing on any of these passengers was moving. The headphone cords were vertical. The woman's tote bag was motionless in her lap. A man in the 7th row had a paper coffee cup in the seat beside him and the surface of the coffee was flat. So, like a photograph of coffee. Like coffee that had stopped being liquid and become a picture of liquid. I could feel the bus moving. I could see the road scrolling past the window. The motion was real. I was swaying slightly in my seat the way you do. They were not. I pressed myself back against the window and I brought my knees up toward my chest and I thought, very clearly, these people are not asleep. And then, because a part of my brain was still trying to protect me from what I was understanding, I thought, they're just very tired. And then I thought, or they're not people at all. And I didn't let myself think the next thing. I wouldn't let myself think it. I sat against the window and I breathed through my nose and I counted to 20 and counted back down and then I thought about it anyway because you can't keep the true things out, eventually they get in. The true thing was this. Nobody on this bus was breathing. I don't know when I noticed it. It might have been slowly accumulating in the back of my mind the whole time, the wrong kind of quiet, the absence of the soft unconscious sounds that living bodies make, the shift of weight, the smallest exhale, the occasional swallow. On a bus with 11 passengers, even sleeping passengers, there should be breath. There should be the microsounds of biology continuing its work. There was nothing. The bus drove on. The trees gave nothing away. The road had no end that I could see. At some point, I'd lost track of time, my phone had died, the bus slowed. We were pulling into a stop. I pressed my face against the window. Outside, illuminated in the bus's exterior lights, was a structure that looked like a bus shelter. A three-sided plexiglass enclosure with a metal bench and a route sign. The sign was blank. The shelter sat in a flat, open area with no context. No road leading to it, no buildings visible, no lights beyond the reach of the bus's glow. Just the shelter, standing in the dark like something that had been placed there and forgotten. The doors opened. Nobody got up. None of the 11 passengers so much as stirred. But the driver was waiting. I could feel him waiting, the engine idling, the doors open, the night air coming in cold and carrying no smell at all. Not pine from the trees, not exhaust, not the particular cold dirt smell of October in Indiana. Nothing. Air that had never been anywhere. And I understood, in the way you understand things in nightmares, not deduced, not reasoned, just suddenly known the way you know the rules of the world you're in, that the door was open for me. This was my stop. I said, "This isn't Millfield." The driver said, "No. But it's where you're going." "I'm not getting off here." A long pause. Then, "Caleb, look around you." I didn't want to. I looked. The woman in the tan coat was looking at me. So was the man in the surplus jacket. So were all of them. Every passenger on the bus, all 11, turned in their seats, facing me, their empty flashlight eyes pointed at me with the unanimity of something that has decided. They were still not breathing. Their mouths were all slightly open. The driver said, "It's just one step, son. That's all it's ever been." I stood up. I don't know why I stood up. Something in his voice had worked on my legs before my mind could stop it. I was standing in the aisle with my bag over my shoulder and the open door 2 rows ahead of me and the darkness outside and the blank shelter and the no-smell air coming in cold and patient. I took one step toward the door. And then a phone rang. Not my phone. My phone was dead. One of the passengers. A muffled ringtone coming from somewhere in the middle of the bus, from the pocket or bag of one of the still, silent, not breathing people. An old ringtone, the default iPhone marimba, cheerful and absurd and absolutely, impossibly alive. All 11 heads swiveled toward the sound. Just for a second. Just 1 second of collective attention pulled away from me. I ran. I don't know exactly what happened in the next 30 seconds. I know I hit the emergency exit at the back of the bus, the push bar, the alarm shrieking, and I know I fell out onto ground that felt like ground, solid and real and cold, and I rolled and came up running without looking back. I ran into the dark. Away from the bus, away from the shelter, away from the road. Into the trees. I ran until my lungs gave out and I fell against a tree trunk and slid down to sitting and stayed there, shaking for what felt like a very long time. The bus alarm had stopped. I didn't know when. After a while, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour, I genuinely don't know, I saw lights. Real lights, sodium orange street lights, visible through the trees about a quarter-mile north of where I was sitting. I got up. I walked toward them. They were street lights on a road I recognized. County Road 7, about 2 miles east of Harlow. Real road. Real lights. A real pickup truck passing at 60 miles an hour that I had to jump back from. I flagged down the next vehicle. A woman in a Subaru who looked at me like I'd crawled out of the earth, which I suppose I nearly had, and she drove me to the Harlow police station and I sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights that hummed the ordinary hum of fluorescent lights, and I told a deputy named Goss everything I've just told you, and watched his face do the thing faces do when they are deciding whether someone is dangerous or just crazy. He drove me out to County Road 7 at dawn. We didn't find a bus shelter. We didn't find the road, the straight, endless road through the trees. We found trees, a lot of trees, and my own footprints in the mud and nothing else. That was 8 months ago. I have ridden the Route 14 bus many times since then. Same buses, same drivers, different ones with faces I can see clearly and hold in my mind. Nothing strange has happened. But here's the thing I haven't told anyone. The thing I haven't said out loud, not to Deputy Goss, not to my brother, not to the therapist the county referred me to. When I was sitting against that tree in the dark, after I ran, waiting to catch my breath, I checked my pockets. Just checking, the automatic pat-down you do when you've been running, making sure you still have your wallet, your keys. My phone was in my left jacket pocket. I had put it in my bag before boarding the bus. I was certain of that. I'd zipped it into the front pocket of my overnight bag because the battery was dead and I didn't want it rattling around. It was in my jacket pocket. And it was fully charged. And on the screen of my dead phone that had somehow found its way from my bag into my pocket and charged itself in the dark, there was a text message. The sender's name was blank. Just an empty field where a name should be. The message read, "You'll be back, Caleb. They always come back. There's still a seat with your name on it." I still have the phone. I've shown the message to 3 different people. They all see it. It's real. The thing is, and this is the part one wake up at 3 in the morning thinking about, the part one can't make peace with no matter how many ways I turn it over. I counted the passengers on that bus. Twice. 11 people. But when I looked at the photographs on the Harlow Regional Transit website, they post a company photo every year, all the drivers in their gray uniforms. I found the driver. Not someone who looked like him. The broad shoulders, the uniform. His name was Gerald Purvis. He had driven Route 14 for 19 years. The photo was taken in 2019. Gerald Purvis died in November of that year. Cardiac arrest at the wheel of bus 14 on a Wednesday night. On the way to Millfield. They found the bus on County Road 7, engine still running, stopped at an angle in the right lane like he'd just pulled over. There were 11 passengers on board. None of them were injured. None of them could explain later why none of them had called for help. Why none of them had done anything, why they just sat there quiet until the next driver came. None of them could explain it. I understand now why they couldn't. Some routes, once you're on them, don't let you off so easily. I've driven past that stretch of Route 9 more than 1,000 times. Every night. Every single night for 6 years. And I can tell you with absolute certainty, that terminal was never there before. It was 2:47 in the morning when my car decided to die. I know the exact time because I checked my phone the second the engine coughed twice and went silent, coasting me onto the gravel shoulder like a dead horse being dragged off the road. The dashboard went dark. The headlights blinked out. And for a moment, I just sat there in the sudden, complete blackness of a November night on a county highway, listening to the tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine and the wind pushing dead leaves across the asphalt. I work overnight inventory at a distribution warehouse 40 minutes outside of Millhaven. It's the kind of job that makes you invisible, the kind that strips you of any sense of time until time becomes something that simply happens to you rather than something you live in. 6 years of it. 6 years of driving home alone before sunrise, watching the deer stand frozen in the tree line, watching the farms go dark, watching the same strip of road unspool beneath my tires like a film reel that never ends. So when I climbed out of my dead car that night and pulled out my phone to call a tow, I wasn't afraid. I was annoyed, tired, already calculating how long I'd have to wait, how much it would cost, whether I'd be able to sleep before my next shift. That's when I turned around and saw it. The Millhaven Central Bus Terminal. It sat back from the highway about 40 yards, behind a row of skeletal oaks that I must have passed 10,000 times without ever noticing what stood behind them. A long, low building, maybe the length of a city block, built from pale brick that had gone gray with age. A flat roof with a wide overhang supported by concrete pillars along the front. A parking lot with cracked asphalt, weeds splitting through every seam, the painted lines so faded they were barely suggestions. And light. From inside, a dim and stuttering light, the color of old teeth, filtering through the big plate glass windows along the front wall. Fluorescent light. The kind that flickers once every few seconds like it's having second thoughts. The kind that means someone is in there. I've told myself since that I only went inside to use their phone. That's the logical explanation, the one I've rehearsed. My cell service out there on Route 9 was 2 bars of nothing, and every call I tried to make dissolved into static and then silence. The terminal had lights. Lights meant power. Power meant a landline. But I think, and this is the part one don't like to sit with, I think I went inside because something in that building wanted me to. Something patient and practiced at wanting. The front doors were heavy glass and aluminum frames, the kind you see in old government buildings, and they swung open with a pneumatic hiss that seemed too loud for the night. The sound echoed back at me from somewhere deep inside, as if the building were much larger on the inside than the outside suggested. The smell hit me first. Stale air. Old upholstery. Cigarette smoke ground into linoleum over decades. A bottom note of something else underneath, wet concrete maybe, or standing water. Like a basement that had flooded once a long time ago and never quite dried out. The terminal was one long main hall, maybe 200 feet from the entrance to the far wall. Rows of molded plastic seats, orange and avocado green, bolted to the floor in clusters facing the windows. Most of the fluorescent panels overhead were dead. The ones that worked gave off that dim, spoiled light I'd seen from outside, and they flickered just often enough to make the shadows move. To my left, a row of ticket windows, each with a frosted glass partition and a metal grate, all dark behind the glass. To my right, A small snack counter with a smeared sneeze guard and a rotating display case that held nothing. Ahead, at the far end of the hall, I could make out a large arrivals and departures board, the old kind with mechanical letters and numbers that flip when the information changes. Even from the door, I could see that it was active. Rows of destinations clicking and adjusting in the silence. And the people. There were perhaps 20 of them scattered through the terminal. Sitting in the plastic chairs or standing near the windows or gathered in small clusters near the board. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about them. Late-night travelers. People waiting for buses. Normal. But within maybe 30 seconds of walking through that door, I understood that something was very wrong with every single one of them. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the absence of conversation. I'd been in bus terminals at odd hours before, and people don't always talk. But this was a deeper silence than that. No one was on their phone. No one was listening to earbuds. No rustling of bags or newspapers. No one had a coffee cup or a snack from the empty counter. They simply sat or stood with their belongings, bags and suitcases that looked old and worn, leather valises, cardboard boxes tied with twine, and they were absolutely, perfectly still. Still in the way that things in photographs are still. I walked toward the snack counter looking for a phone, trying not to make eye contact, trying to look like a man with a purpose. But I felt them watching me. Not all at once, never all at once. One would look up as I passed, holding my gaze for just a beat too long before returning to whatever occupied them, and then another would turn to watch, and then another. Never more than 2 or 3 at a time. Just enough for me to know I was being tracked. Just enough to make my stomach clench. A woman seated near the window was dressed in a wool coat and a small hat with a veil. The coat was belted at the waist and fell below the knee. The hat looked like something from a 1950s magazine. Her gloves were white. She was clutching a small patent leather purse with both hands and staring at the arrivals board with an expression of profound concentration. An older man in the next row wore a flannel work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow despite the cold. His trousers were held up by suspenders. His shoes were steel-toed boots, leather, cracked along the toe box, polished to a dull shine. The kind of shoes a man wore for hard work in a time before sneakers existed. A young couple near the far wall sat close together but not touching. The woman wore a flower print dress and a cardigan. The man wore a collared shirt and a narrow tie, loosened at the throat. They both stared forward. They did not speak to each other. They did not look at each other. They sat with the rigid propriety of people posing for a portrait they know will be their last. I found a payphone near the restrooms at the back of the hall. I don't know when I last used a payphone. They still had it mounted in a little alcove with a clamshell hood over it, and when I lifted the handset it was cool and smooth and smelled of old plastic. I pressed it to my ear. Dead. Not a dial tone. Not static. Just a deep, hollow silence that somehow felt louder than noise. That's when I walked to the arrivals board. Up close, it was even larger than it had appeared from the entrance, maybe 12 feet wide and 8 feet tall, a grid of rows and columns, each cell populated by those small mechanical letters that flip with a dry clicking sound when the information updates. Destination. Departure. Arrival. Gate. Status. I read the destinations first. Breckenridge. Haverford Junction. Coalport. Mineral City. Dunmore Station. Names I half recognized, small towns in the region, some of which I was fairly certain no longer existed in any meaningful way. Old mining towns. Collapsed mill towns. Places that had been on maps once and then had slowly ceased to be. Then I looked at the departure times. The earliest listed was 11:40 p.m. The latest was 4:15 a.m. And they were all tonight. This was clearly tonight's board, not some relic display left over from the building's operational years. The mechanical letters had been updated recently. Some of them were still clicking, still adjusting like living things. But then I looked at the years. Not every terminal displays the year on its board. Most don't, because why would you? Everyone knows what year it is. But this one did, in a small column off to the right side that I'd initially taken for some kind of status indicator. And when I read those numbers, the cold that moved through me had nothing to do with the November temperature. 1951, 1963, 1978, 1984, 1971. Each departure had a year attached to it. Different years. Decades of years going back more than 70 years. As if every bus listed on that board belonged to a different era. As if every bus listed on that board had already left. I backed away from the board slowly. The way you back away from something that might react to sudden movement. A man was standing about 6 feet behind me. I hadn't heard him approach. He was young, mid-20s maybe, with close-cropped dark hair and a face that was handsome in a specific era-stamped way. Wide lapels on his jacket, pegged trousers, a thin mustache. He was looking at me with an expression that I can only describe as hungry relief. The way a person looks when they've been alone for a very long time and suddenly see another human face. He opened his mouth. No sound came out. His lips moved, shaped themselves around words, around a sentence, around what might have been a question or a warning or a plea. But the sound was gone, eaten by that deep terminal silence before it could reach me. I took a step back. He took a step forward. "I'm just waiting for a tow," I said, and my voice came out smaller than I intended, eaten up quickly by the air. He shook his head. Slowly. Deliberately. Not the way you shake your head to disagree, the way you shake your head when you've accepted something terrible. Then he looked down at my feet. I looked down too. My shadow stretched behind me in the flickering fluorescent light. It moved when I moved. It was mine. His shadow didn't exist. I looked at the floor beneath him and behind him and around him. Nothing. The light passed through him the way light passes through very old glass. He cast no shadow at all. I looked back up at his face. He had already turned away. He walked back toward the plastic chairs with the shuffling patience of a man who has nothing but time, and he sat down, and he folded his hands in his lap, and he resumed staring at the arrivals board. I looked at the other people in the terminal then, really looked at them the way I hadn't let myself look before. None of them cast shadows. I moved in front of one of the working fluorescent panels and watched the light pour down around me and pool in a dark shape on the linoleum at my feet. I moved my arm. The shadow moved. I moved toward the woman in the wool coat and the veil, and I watched the floor between us, and there was nothing beneath her, nothing at all. The light went through her to the floor and reflected back clean and pale and unmarked. She looked up at me. Her eyes were the color of old photographs, not brown or gray or green, but that specific sepia tone, that warm amber yellow of a picture taken in a time before the world was in color. And when she looked at me, there was an expression in those eyes that I recognized despite never having seen it before. It was grief. A settled, ancient, very patient grief. The kind that has had decades to find its final shape. I understood then, in the way that you understand things in nightmares, not because the logic works out, but because the truth lands in you all at once, fully formed, without the courtesy of a gradual revelation, what this place was. These were people who had come to this terminal to catch a bus. At some point in their own time, in 1951, in 1963, in 1971, in all those years on the board, they had sat in these plastic seats and waited for their departure to be called. And something had gone wrong. Their buses had never come, or they had missed them, or something had intervened between the ticket window and the gate, between the waiting and the going. And here they remained, suspended in this in-between place, not departed and not arrived, waiting for a connection that would never be made. And now here I was, in the terminal with them. And the cold in my chest had nothing to do with the November air. I went for the front doors. I don't remember deciding to run. I remember standing near the woman in the wool coat, and then I remember my hand hitting the aluminum push bar of the front door and the pneumatic hiss and the cold air outside hitting my face like a slap. I ran across the cracked parking lot. I ran through the break in the skeletal oaks. I ran to my car, yanked the door open, and sat behind the wheel in the dark, breathing hard, watching the terminal through the windshield. The pale brick, the flat roof, the dim, flickering light behind the plate glass windows. And the board, which I could see from where I sat because the windows were large and I had a direct line of sight to it. One of the entries was changing. The mechanical letters were clicking, flipping, rearranging. One by one, the cells in a single row were resolving into new information. Destination, Millhaven Central. Departure, 3:05 a.m. The year. My year. Status, boarding. I turned the key. The engine, which had been dead for 20 minutes, started without hesitation. I drove. I drove the 40 minutes home, and I did not look in the rearview mirror once. I made myself coffee I didn't drink. I sat at my kitchen table until the windows went gray with dawn. I told myself what anyone would tell themselves. The fluorescent lights had made everything look strange. The people were just eccentrics. The arrivals board was a prop, a decoration, an art piece left by some previous owner. My shadow and theirs, I'd been confused, exhausted, frightened. It had all been a perfectly ordinary place at a perfectly ordinary hour, and I had simply been a frightened man projecting horror onto the mundane. I've been very good at telling myself that. For about 3 days. That's when I was cleaning out my jacket, the one I'd been wearing that night, and found a ticket stub in the inside breast pocket. I don't buy things from bus terminals. I don't ride buses. I hadn't reached into my pocket once inside that building. I know I hadn't. But here was a stub of thin cardstock, the old-fashioned kind with the perforated edge, slightly yellowed, slightly soft, the way paper gets when it has been handled for a long time by many different hands. Millhaven Central Bus Terminal. One-way passage. Issued to passenger. Destination, blank. Valid for indefinite transit. Not transferable. Not refundable. And at the very bottom, in the small mechanical font of a stamp made by a machine that had been clicking and flipping and rearranging for longer than I'd been alive. Do not miss your departure. I drive a different route home now. I go 30 miles out of my way. I don't let myself think too hard about whether the terminal is still there, waiting behind its row of skeletal oaks, its board clicking and updating, its passengers sitting in their orange and avocado green chairs in the dim light, waiting with the terrible patience of those who have nowhere else to be. I keep the ticket stub in my kitchen drawer. I check it sometimes. Not because I want to. Because once, just once, the destination field wasn't blank. It had my name.